We do not care.
Welcome to the fourth official episode of the We Do Not Care podcast. We hope you're doing well and were able to watch some playoff football yesterday and today. To start, let's talk about some of the head coaching candidates that Pittsburgh has either interviewed or requested to interview. What's going on with that? So with Chris Shula, who's obviously one of our top candidates right now, he's had, I believe, his interview this past weekend. It's also nice to see that he turned down the Browns. That's always nice to see. Statistically, he's led a top 4 defense this year. He's a respected guy under the McVay tree. He's obviously a top candidate. If he's able to bring in, a top OC or a guy he views highly, such as Shieldhouse, who's the Rams passing game coordinator, I certainly wouldn't mind that. On to him, Shieldhouse, he played quarterback in college. He's worked this entire year with Stafford, helping him on his MVP run, working with wide receivers, talented guys like Puka and like Devontae Adams, as well as with tight ends like Higbee and Parkinson. And one thing I really like about Chias as a potential OC is his involvement with the tight ends. You see Parkinson and Higbee. You saw last week they just beat the Panthers on the last minute touchdown where I believe it was Parkinson got that catch in the end zone. And I really think if he comes to Pittsburgh, he's able to get Muth more involved and Darnell as well. I think he'd really be able to utilize them really well. Then you have guys I don't take as seriously, and that includes, Minter from LA, McCarthy, who is just frankly as old as dirt, and I don't want to see him come back. It's the same thing with Jason Garrett. We've seen this movie before. We need youth. It's just is what it is. You also
I
have the
put
Panthers.
Weaver and Avero in that same
Right.
category.
Right. And you have Weaver and Avero. As I was going to say, the Panthers DC, who's been, pretty solid for them. But, I just think there's better candidates. Like you were saying, the Green Bay's defense coordinator, who without Micah, frankly, just hasn't been able to figure it out at the latter half of the season. But, maybe we could see what he could do with Pittsburgh's weapons on defense if he was brought in. Same thing with all these other defensive guys. Obviously, there are more qualified guys like Salah and Flores who, like Shula, a defensive coach who I'd be way more comfortable with if they bring in the right OC who just have great resumes. Just saw that Flores, like you said, is getting a second interview in person. So obviously that's important, something to keep our eyes on. I just think Flores is getting too many looks personally. And he already had his stint in Pittsburgh, but I could be wrong. We'll see if he ends up coming. Personally, my top option would be Shula, and for him to bring in Shieldhouse or someone else he's familiar with as OC. What do you think?
One notable thing that we haven't discussed is Rooney saying in his press conference that none of these coordinators that are still on the staff are safe, and that he's going to let the next head coach build his staff, which is great to hear. In terms of the candidates that we have right now, I don't mind the McCarthy interview. I think he'd be great as a consultant. He's been away from the game for a little bit, and he had that great stint in Green Bay. Terrific record, led the Packers to a Super Bowl victory, had consecutive 12-win seasons, has definitely proven himself as someone that can win in this league. But I think he'd be better served as a consultant right now, just with the game modernizing in the way that it is. With Flores, like you were saying, he has had his stint in Pittsburgh and we didn't retain him. He left, did a terrific job in Minnesota. Tomlin's gone, so maybe it's a new regime and maybe he'd be open to it. He's, accepted the interview that's happening in person now after having a virtual interview. So, something to keep an eye on for sure. With Halfley, like you said, has been kind of dependent on the rush, and losing Micah is not going to help any coordinator, but it's been notable the fall off that the Packers defense had and weren't able to pull it out against Chicago. So, that's something.
Derrick Henry legacy game also.
Exactly. So, there are guys that I'm not taking as seriously in this search. We mentioned Minter and Avero, the D coordinators. I just don't really see them as legitimate candidates for a head coaching search. But, if we were to bring in a guy like Shula, who can bring a guy along with him, like I was saying, Rooney said that none of these coordinators are safe. So if he could bring in his passing coordinator, that would be great for us. I think modernizing our offense is something that we really need to take seriously. And it's not to say that we can't hire a defensive head coach. Steelers, the Steelers are built on having a great defense, and oftentimes our defense carries us to victory and sometimes even scores as many points as our offense. Talking about balanced on both sides of the ball. But to try and modernize and try and be more innovative on offense would be something that we really need to take seriously. So I think Shula would be a great hire. the Rams are paying their defense very little this year relative to the rest of the league, and what
I think
he's
it's
been able to
bought I think
do.
it's 32nd. I think it's 62 million, I believe, and I think
And,
that's at the last spot.
and they've fallen off a little bit here towards the end of the year, but a lot of that has been with injuries in the DB room. So I think, with the way that we've been able to kind of bolster our own DB room within the past year and take that more seriously, even though we have the highest paid defense, he would be a great fit. And I also think with McCarthy, maybe he's brought on as a consultant, but all the coaches we've hired in our franchise's history have been young guys. And so I don't really know that McCarthy fits in with that kind of mold that we've had in years past. And obviously, this is a new regime. Who knows what Umar Khan is going to do? Obviously, he has links to McCarthy,
Mhm.
but I just think we would be kind of better served going for a younger head coach. And we're not really a team that ties our success to the head coach maybe as much as other teams. You saw it with Atlanta's head coach opening. I don't think they've had a coach in their franchise's history that's been there for more than 6 years. The Steelers are not that way. I don't think we're going to be quick to fire regardless of who we hire. So I think it's great that we're taking it seriously and we are interviewing all of the candidates that are available, including San Francisco's offensive coordinator, the other Kubiak, which I think
Yeah.
is great because a lot of the candidates that we've been interviewing are either D coordinators or head coaches that have been out of the game. So it'll be great to see how this one plays out. But looking forward to seeing how they prioritize, being innovative right now versus people that have experience at the head coaching position. I think Mike McCarthy's a Pennsylvania guy, so I'm not surprised that they're bringing him in, and he's been, doing what he wants to do for the last few years, been out of the game, and definitely can get the job done without a doubt. But looking forward for these next few years, I don't think it's a bad idea to try and start fresh. And I think they're going to hire someone that they believe in, and they believe in to the extent that even if the first few years are rocky, the Steelers are not a team that really rebuilds. You could say it in quotation marks, but we're a team that's gonna, take these next few years and see what we can accomplish. And if we have success, that's great. And if not, and we have to kind of work the kinks out of ridding ourselves of what the regime has been for all of these years. Tomlin had been there for 19 years. Then we just have to roll with the punches. And so I think it'll be an interesting one to follow. And I'm certainly looking forward to seeing how these interviews play out. I think it's great that they're bringing in Flores for another interview. Even if he's already been on the staff, I would have loved for them to retain them with how much struggle we had with Terrell Austin and how much he was carried by our pass rush this year, which at times was completely non-existent, and it showed. So to be interviewing Flores and taking him seriously, like you were saying, he has a lot of interest, and I don't doubt that he will have more than one offer as a head coach this year, but it'd be great to bring him in, whether it's as a D coordinator because he has entertained D coordinator positions, or as a head coach. I think it'd be a great fit.
Yeah, well, like you said with Flores, I mean, if he ends up coming in, without a doubt, the guy who got promoted for the job he wanted is out of there in Austin, which is definitely necessary. Like you said with McCarthy, yeah, I think it's just, it's time to modernize. We need to bring the youth in. I know he and Omar sort of had their ties back in, I think, 2000 it was with New Orleans, a really long time ago. Obviously, McCarthy's a PA native. I think we just need to get younger, honestly, especially on the offensive side of the ball. With that being said, on to the playoffs. I went 2-0 yesterday with my picks. I just thought Denver's D would be too much of a challenge for Allen to play hero ball. That ended up being the case. There were some questionable PI calls, not PI. Personally, I thought that was an interception. I understand Cooks had it all the way down and he was sort of touching the ground. But as you roll over, I feel like you should have to keep the ball in possession. That's just my personal opinion. I know it's a ticky tack call. I think that pass interference in overtime on Tre'Davious White, that was a little bit more questionable. But that's just how it goes. Someone's always going to be unhappy. Better for those teams than rather it hurting our Pittsburgh Steelers. Unfortunately, it's sad to see Bo Nix, or Mo Picks, as some people like to call him, just destroy his ankle. You don't see that very often. We'll see Stidham, who, they both worked together at Auburn all those years ago. We'll see what he can do, maybe a Nick Foles type of story. I also, last night, I had Seattle winning at home by a landslide against an injury-ridden 49ers. We talk about Kubiak being a candidate. I would have liked for them to have a better showing last night, but I also understand just Seattle's the real deal. I feel like they're probably the most complete team in the league right now. And I think the only teams that really show them a genuine threat are the Rams. And I think the Rams will be facing the NFC Championship, and we'll see how that game goes. with that being said, who are your picks for the Texans at the Pats and the Rams at the Bears?
A lot of people have said that the Pats this year have not been tested enough by legitimate competition, but I have to think that Drake May will find a way with their offensive weapons to pull this one out. And they have a great defense. I remember last year when Vrabel got hired, there were about 10 signings in a row, all on the defensive side of the ball. And people were saying, "Oh, you guys are neglecting the offense," but Vrabel was just trying to bolster that defense. And he did a great job. And I think their defense is legitimate, and maybe it's not as strong as the Texans defense is, but I think their offense definitely is stronger than the Texans is and at least more consistent. So I expect to see the Patriots pull out that game. In terms of the Rams versus the Bears, it's tough. The Bears are a great story. I just think that if the Bears play the way that they did against the Packers, they're not going to be able to pull that out because to try and stop that Rams offense in the second half, the way that they were able to contain the Packers offense, is just not feasible. With how many weapons they have, with the way that Puka, regardless of the conditions, regardless of the Rams flight gets delayed or they're playing in freezing cold, Puka has just been a monster this year.
Yep.
And so I just don't see them being able to contain him in the way that they were able to contain some of the Packers' weapons. But the Bears have some sort of undeniable quality that they've been able to get here. They had a crazy comeback, uh, you know, only comparable to what we saw against the Falcons when the Patriots were able to come back in the Super Bowl. So I'm hoping for the Bears to pull this one out, but I think it's going to be a tough task to stop that Rams offense and to stop Stafford. And I honestly think that game will come down to the turnover battle. You know, if the Bears don't get at least two turnovers, it's going to be tough for them to beat the Rams. They're going to have to win that turnover battle, and it's going to be hard for them to take down the Rams if they don't. So, looking forward to that one. It'll be great to see how Shula fares, especially since he's a guy that we're heavily considering and also their passing game coordinator, as we've mentioned. So, looking forward to that one, and it'll be great to see some great teams in the NFC face off for a ticket to the NFC Championship.
Without a doubt, I'm with you on those picks. I think the Texans disrespected the terrible towel. CJ Stroud was talking crap after the game. I don't really know why, because he had the interception. I think he had two fumbles or whatever it was. He really didn't do anything. I think without Nico Collins, it's going to be very hard to play against this Pats defense, especially with Gonzalez on the other side of the ball. And they just have a really elite rush defense and D lineman. You saw that they just dismantled the Chargers, and Justin Herbert got hit 100 times. So I'm putting the house on the Pats taking it home. I think the Rams and the Bears, it's going to be a close one. I think it's either going to be really defensive or just a straight shootout, but it's going to be close either way. But I do agree with you. I'm going to take playoff experience. I do think that Stafford and company will be able to get a win and take them to the NFC Championship. As much as I love Caleb and the Bears, I think this Cinderella story is going to have to end. I think Ben Johnson has been great for them this year. I think they've improved so much, and they're going to be scary in the next couple of years. But I'm going to take playoff experience in Matthew Stafford and Sean McVay, who have got it done before. So yeah, I think that's a wrap. We'll see you guys later this week, where we'll discuss some position rankings for the Pittsburgh Steelers from this past season. So thanks so much for watching. Here we go, Steelers.
Here we go.